Hi, everyone. Welcome back to PODTC. This is episode 4. I thought about it a little bit of soul searching after the first 3, and I thought it was a little Northeast Ohio heavy. Makes a little bit sense just because that's where I've spent my whole career, but we have a lot of great professionals all around the state. So I wanted to branch off a little bit and talk to someone else for a change, right? So today I am joined by Rachel Fulton, a friend of mine from Southwest Ohio. Geez, I'm still on the East train. So sorry. Rachel is at Wright State. She is the Right Path Program Manager, and I'm really excited for our conversation today. How are you doing, Rachel?
Hey, howdy. I'm doing all right. Hanging in there. It's, towards the end of the week when we're recording this, so it's all looking up from here.
I know. The sun is out on all, quadrants of the state, and it's warm. And I think we were just talking about how we're just excited for that to be. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So today's subject is a little bit different. We're not necessarily going to dive down too much into like a specific program partnership or something along that line. So we're talking about duties as assigned, the term in higher education that we all have come to know and maybe love or not love, but it's here to stay. And Rachel and I are going to get deep into it. But what I usually ask first is that for our guests to kind of give a little bit about themselves. So first, Rachel, I'm going to ask, could you let the audience know, obviously your name and where you've worked and stuff has already come up, but maybe where you went to school or anything else that you would like to share?
Sure. So yeah, you already said that I'm the Right Path Program Manager at Wright State University, and that is true through May 5th. May 8th, I'll be switching over and heading back to University of Cincinnati. So excited
Congrats.
to continue in transfer land over there, but definitely a shifting of roles as far as what that looks like. I do use pronouns she, her, and hers. I always like to throw that out there. As far as sort of my education, I am an Indiana transplant. And so I did my undergraduate in the Purdue School of Science at IUPUI, soon to be formerly known as IUPUI, a Bachelor of Science in Psychology with a dual concentration. And then I went to work full-time. And then while I was working full-time, I completed my Master's of Science in Education in the Higher Education Student Affairs IU program. So IU HISA is what they would say in the state. So just a little fun fact, personal item. I spend my spare time advocating for and traveling with and serving a nonprofit organization called Field of Dreams Uganda. Does work with orphan and vulnerable children in primary schools there through soccer and education. So those education ties continue on overseas in Uganda as well. So always happy to chat more about that with anyone interested, but that's not what we're here for today.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rachel. That's big bombshell right at the beginning of the interview. So thanks for sharing that. And we obviously like our Indiana transplants. You're still a fellow Midwesterner, so
right.
And you've been here for quite a while, I feel like, anyway. So
yeah, came over in 2019. That sounds right.
Yeah, it's been a few years. That works. Yeah. These are my favorite parts of these interviews because I just learn more about. I know everyone in a professional context, and then I learn more of the private stuff. So I guess that kind of leads us straight into our next question, though. That explains kind of where you came from, but it doesn't even sound like, sorry, that sounded rude. It doesn't sound like you were a transfer student. I was not back in the day either. I kind of more or less fell into the position and kind of fell in love with the field once I was here. So how did you get into working with transfer students?
Yeah, very much the same. Sort of came to me, if you will. I was not a transfer student, though I was a dual credit student, i.e. Indiana's version of CCP and whatnot.
Transferred credits. Yeah,
exactly. Transfer credits, but definitely direct entry. Yeah. So working though with transfer students started during my undergraduate career. I did all of the higher ed undergraduate involvement opportunities. I was an orientation leader and a first-year seminar mentor and a transfer seminar mentor, and I was a peer advisor. I was basically everything but an RA at one point or another. And so during those orientation and peer advising experiences specifically, I was at IUPUI. They had specific transfer orientation days. It was separate experience from the first year programs, and dedicated days and times for those, and required for those students to come. And so those were always my favorite days to facilitate, just because there is some wisdom and maturity that comes with our transfer student population, whether they are what we would consider a quote unquote traditional transfer, right? That's doing a vertical from a community college into their 4-year, having gone straight out of high school, right? Or if they were coming back and, you know, their 2 kids have graduated and now it's their turn, sort of a process for turning adult. So those were always my favorite days. And so that was really my in, but I've been involved in some way, shape, or form in transfer land, as I like to call it, since I was a full-time professional. So after undergrad, I went into the Ivy Tech Community College system. It is a statewide community college system in Indiana, so a little bit different than how we function here in Ohio. But one of my first 2 roles was in an advising and success coach position up in the Fort Wayne region. And that served all student types, dominantly either those dual credits, some associate programs, and then I served a lot of students who were looking to go to IPFW, is what it was called at the time. So IU Fort Wayne and Purdue Fort Wayne, serving all student types. So I had some contact there from the success coaching perspective. Really, though, diving into transfer land when I came back to IUPUI as a working professional, as a full-time staff member. I was the assistant director in what was known as the Office of Transfer Student Services there, and was in that role for 7 years, sounds right? Question mark. Somewhere between 5 and 7 years.
Close enough, yeah.
Role. Exactly. And so that office served transfer students exclusively following the point of admission. So as soon as those students flipped to admit in the system, we picked them up and carried them through what we called the transfer year experience, which really sort of tapered off towards their end of their first semester. So that included, you know, things like transitional advising, talking through degree audits and distributed versus undistributed credit. That was a key component of orientation by that time, sort of a pre-orientation workshop, facilitating National Transfer Student Week, facilitating t-shirt swaps at the beginning of the semester, and really just advocating for transfer across campus was a big piece of it. IUPUI participated in the Foundations of Excellence transfer focus through John Gardner Institute while I was in that role. So a deep dive, right, into transfer policies and practices from faculty, staff, student perspectives, and whatnot. So that was my big sort of make waves, if you will, section of transfer land. And then since then, you know, working in advising, working in articulation agreements, working in credit evaluation systems, and then partnership programs in my role now, since I've been in Ohio, is sort of where I've been lying in wait and trying to make all the changes that I can. Having all that IUPUI experience of, you know, radical change on a campus. So well, that's awesome. I mean, like, I can see the clear progression, like undergraduate, you know, I was an RA, so I'll fill in that gap for us in this conversation, but you did pretty much everything else you could in that sense, and then kind of made your way towards us in transfer land. I'm going to keep using that term since now you've brought me to it, so I like it. I think the last kind of quick piece I have as a question, like, you know, I know that you've been involved with like even an NISTS over the last few years. When did you get involved with them and kind of how did that start? Yeah, so the past 2 years, like you were just saying, the past 2 years, I served on the NISTS Curriculum Planning Committee for the annual conferences, both virtual and in person. And then I'm also a steering committee member for the NACADA Advising Community on Transfer Students. So professional development is huge for me. It's very important. I negotiate it into my contracts, right?
Yeah.
like it is the sort of goal number 2 of my job, right? Goal number 1 is to do my job. Goal number 2 is professional development and how can I grow? And so that really started at IUPUI. Within the first year of me being there, we presented at every NISTS conference from 2013 to 2018.
Wow.
When I left. Yeah. Part of that is because we were doing a lot of good work, right? With Foundations of Excellence, making some changes. It varied whether it was about transfer orientation or transfer seminars or transfer mentoring programs. But that's really where my initial involvement started. And then sort of since then, I've presented on and off at either of those conferences. But the Curriculum Planning Committee, NISTS, began those committees. I think it was just 2 years ago. I think I was in the inaugural, because it sort of stemmed out of the pandemic, right? That is or is not over. Stemmed out of that virtual space. And so moving back to an in-person / hybrid model, what does that look like, and more hands needed? And really they wanted to have voice from the people doing the work. And so on my committee, it was 15-ish people. And that was just, curriculum planning. There's still local arrangements and networking and those types of committees as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Busy, very busy all the time. Which probably leads us right into the topic of today. Because our normal jobs keep us busy all the time. And then we have this gray area of duties as assigned, right? So I guess we should just hop right into it. What would you, in your current position, consider, this quote unquote duties as assigned?
Yeah. So one thing with all transfer positions, and holds true in the one I'm currently in, is this transfer advocacy component. Because transfer land is so small, and we generally are situated on campuses, at least on the 4-year side, we're situated on campuses that are very direct entry focused. We get to be a little bit of and I'm going to use a Dr. Seuss reference, and I hate that this is the reference that's stuck in my head, but we are the Horton Hears a Who in the jungle of Newell, right? We are constantly the ones that are hearing, we are here, right, from our transfer students. And so that transfer advocacy piece is never anywhere in a job description. It is just sort of now you are in a transfer role. And so the accountability that comes with that is advocating on your campus or at the state level, whatever that may be, right? Whether that's facilitating workshops for campus, providing tip sheets and sort of transfer profile type of information, right? Who are your students in your academic college? Challenging language on campus, right? If I see class of one more time, right? And having those conversations. So that transfer advocacy piece is huge. And it's sort of the written duties as assigned for any transfer pro. That's the big one. The other pieces are somewhat self-inflicted. Before we talk about a big one, other self-inflicted duties as assigned, once someone finds out that you like being on a search committee, that is noted. And so if they are looking for someone to be on a search committee or who is representing the transfer voice, right? Oh, well, you love them. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Well, that's right until you're on 5, right? Right at the same time, that kind of a thing. So those kinds of sort of, you made yourself known and you were good at it, right? So, and that ties me into sort of the biggest one that's on my mind right now is social media. But a lot of other duties as assigned come as a result of vacancies or understaffing. And so you either or someone else notices that you're good at something. And so then it becomes yours, regardless of when that position may be filled. It may just become you were good at it, so let's keep you on it. And if you've got the capacity to handle that, right, beyond when that vacancy has been filled, then by all means, right, don't broke it, or don't fix what's not broken. Well, however that phrase goes.
Close enough.
Close enough. And so the big one for me right now is social media. So I have been running the Wright State Transfer Center social media since March or April of 2022. So just at a year, I think, that I've been running that on the Twitter side of things. And then we added Instagram in January. So really upping our content there. And so that has been by far my biggest other duties as assigned from a time perspective. Sure. From a time sink and having to prioritize it and find space to get that work done. But those are sort of the top hits, if you will.
Sure. Well, I think it's pretty like typical also, like obviously the more you might think this is a good idea, this could help out transfer students or whatnot, but the person who has the idea is usually the person that is looked to then carry out that idea. So almost it's not a punishment because we do it for the good of the order, but also, it can be, time is obviously it's a very limited resource and we all just have a small amount of it, which I have totally run social media, platform media accounts for jobs before, in other contexts, and like it's a ton of work. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of consistent work where like certain things that we do, maybe this year is a really hot time for this, and then then in around this time it might cool off and we can start to focus on something else. Social media, at least during the semester, is definitely not something that cools off. It's something that you have to do pretty consistently. But also social media is not a new idea, like I was just alluding to. So how did that get put, how did that go on your plate?
Yeah, so in this role, our transfer center team is an office of 4. Previously an office of 3. And so when that one vacancy came up, typically it would fall in the assistant director of transfer admission and success role. That role was vacated. And so it was just our director and myself, and somebody needed to do it. So it was going to be me. Mostly because I had familiarity, right? I'm using social media. At the time, I had my personal Twitter and I was live tweeting conferences and all sorts of things. I'm on Instagram every day, so I sort of see what's happening, and I follow other transfer professionals and other transfer centers across the states, just from my connections I've made in NISTS and things, right? Like I want to see your good ideas. I want to see your student spotlights and how you're doing that. And so I had awareness of it and familiarity with the platforms to at least jump in, right? Now, when we brought on Instagram in January, I did do some strategizing, if you will. So realigning there, our Twitter at one point was very much here's where we're going today, right? We're at Clark State or we're at St. Clair today. And that was about it. Starting in January, we really ramped up to almost daily posts at this point, both on Instagram and Twitter. We're starting to use stories for when we're on the road on Instagram, just because that is a time sensitive sort of capture it in that 24-hour window and be good sort of scenario. So it came to me just sort of because I was the most knowledgeable of the two of us at that point. And I had some capacity with where now, albeit there were other duties that I was also doing to help alleviate that absence while we were hiring our 2 new fabulous folks. But social media by far took the most time and took the most factoring in. Thankfully, it sort of happened in a summer session, right? That position was vacated in March. And so I had sort of summer is a slow season in Right Path land. And so I had some capacity to start building and brainstorming and thinking of that kind of thing.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of work. You do a really good job. I mean, I was turned on to your, it was a little while ago. So it was just when you guys had Twitter. So when I got on there, I mean, like your graphics look really nice. It was very clear that like, I think I did see mostly like, hey, this is where we're going today.
Yep.
But I mean, it's very clear and articulate. If I was a student following that, I would know exactly where you were going to be at that specific time. So I feel like that's a useful thing for students. And if students, do they ever like DM on there, or they ever reply a little bit? Not, I mean, I feel like Twitter especially is just like, it's almost like an announcement page sometimes in
Right.
transfer land. So
Yeah, so definitely not. So that is one of the conversations that, you know, as we're posting more, Instagram is getting more traffic than Twitter, and that's just
sure.
generally true.
Yep.
There's some thoughts happening on campus around social media strategy, and, you know, does our office, which really, you know, most institutions of Wright State size or larger sort of have their main account, and then they have an admissions account, and that's sort of where it leaves off, unless your transfer center is like huge, right? You're having a student space and things like that where you may have more student connection. So we're sort of in this in-between space in our transfer center at Wright State, where we're a little more than just admissions, but we're not so big that we have a spot for students to physically come in, or that we don't have specific transfer ambassadors or transfer student staff working for our office or anything like that. And so there's some strategizing around, does our social media account need to exist, or can we fold sort of our concepts into an admissions sort of overarching, right? And weave transfer in there a third of the time, because we're a third of the undergraduate population and a third of the incoming class, that kind of thing. So, but in the meantime, you know, Instagram is growing our views. So our insights and things that you can see in both Twitter and Instagram have been growing with the daily content being posted, as opposed to just, you know, this Tuesday we're here, next Wednesday we're there. It's sort of a constant steady stream, and I think that has helped. Stories, of course, help, but you're always fighting the algorithm in some way, shape, or form. And I am not, you know, other duties is assigned. I am not to the point of that other duty, including fighting the algorithm full force all the time.
I was gonna say, I feel like big tech companies and stuff like they have full teams on that job just for that. So for you to be uber successful as one person doing it as a side job, essentially, like that's that's cool though. But so like on your team of 4, you know, you might obviously, like, your position obviously is recruitment adjacent, but I mean, like, you do, you know, work that is then used by recruiters out. So so maybe, you know, your primary responsibilities in this case are going to be a bit separate from the rest of your team. But it seems like any office that I see, so like my office is our transfer team's 3 people, yours is 4 people, you know, but like you guys kind of have similar primary responsibilities, but then your duties as assigned can just be all over the place. How do your duties as assigned differ than, you know, you talked about your new colleagues, obviously your supervisor's been there for a while. So like, how does your responsibilities differ from them?
So as far as sort of other duties are assigned, it goes back to that, when you find out you're good at something, you get to keep it a little longer type of thing. Or if you say you like something, you're going to be asked every time. I love, and I said earlier that I love professional development. It's my jam, big fan. So doing those transfer advocacy workshops, or at least offering them to our faculty and staff on campus, you know, a transfer raters 101 type of session. Or educating my colleagues who are new and relatively new to transfer in general about foundational transfer theory, right? We're going to talk about Flaga. We're going to talk about Townsend and Wilson's articles. We're going to talk about some recent research as well. We're going to talk about appreciative advising and how you use that in a transitional model, those kinds of things. And so some of that advocacy / education piece defaults to me on our team, partially because I love it, and partially because I have that content knowledge, and I have sort of that larger scope and experience. And at this point, I've worked a lot of the gamut of the transfer experience, whether it's been here in Ohio or otherwise. And I think those are the 2 big things, right? Whereas my colleagues' other duties as assigned may be evident in different ways. They may be doing some education with our campus partners about you know, what is our transfer center, what services do we offer, presenting at things like Sinclair's staff professional development day. Those kinds of things will default to the faces that they see most frequently. Whereas I tend to be more on the education or back end of things. Now,
Nice.
I think a lot of that comes with time and just being in transfer land, truly. So I think the longer that these two new team folks are in the positions, the more they're going to sort of slide into some of these pieces. At some point, they'll take social media back, right? Because that is in their job descriptions, sort of as they're being, you know, you only get to be new until you've seen all 4 seasons, and then you're seasoned. And so at some point that'll roll back their way. Things like National Transfer Student Week, right? So I planned that in 2022. That is back in their wheelhouse now. And so their other duties as assigned may look a little different as a result.
Nice. Well, like I said earlier, you're obviously busy, and you juggle all these things, some by necessity, some by, you know, I'm okay with you being cool with professional development, because when I asked you, hey, do you want to do this? You're like, yeah, sure. No problems, nothing, no pushback. So I appreciate that. But obviously there's a certain level of like organization or like time management that you need to, how do you prioritize this? You were kind of talking about social media earlier, and we know how it prioritizes itself by nature, obviously, especially on daily content, that you need to have your stuff ready to go at all times. But, you know, you have your primary job responsibilities. How do you stay organized when you are assigned these additional duties on top of your regular workload?
Yeah, good question. I live and die by my Outlook calendar in a lot of ways. And it is color coded, and it is sort of not quite down to the minute, but like down to the half hour, easily 15 minutes every once in a while. So for me, using, you know, I have a specific color for general transfer center work as opposed to right path specific meetings, or right path to-dos, or professional development has its own color, those kinds of things. For me, the biggest piece is remembering that at the end of the, you know, I'm gonna get into my capitalism side of things a little bit. We live in a world where our performance metrics are based on our job descriptions. And so I am going to make sure my job is done first. It just has to take priority, not just for me. Sure, it looks better on my performance eval to have done my job extremely well. But students will suffer if I don't, right? So it's ultimately about the student experience. And if I let, you know, if I go a week or two, a week is already stressing me out. If I go a week without processing Right Path membership applications and being able to load them into our banner system and get them their UIDs and their right state credentials, that's a disservice to them at that point. And so it's finding where you can carve out the time and sort of knowing your own work cycle well enough. So for me, you know, I'm always processing apps on the same day at the same time of day, generally every single week. And sort of the subsequent processes that follow that throughout the week are blocked out. And that's just not non-negotiable time. Things that can be negotiated on my calendar are things like admin time, like email prep. Types of things that are blocked on my calendar. Or, you know, when it comes to social media, right? If I don't get into Instagram to repost other people's stories until I'm about to log off for the day, it'll be all right. If I don't do it at 12:30 where I had it blocked out, if it gets bumped down the line, it's going to be okay. Those kinds of things. So student first, specifically in my program, first, and then at large, right? If me blocking off an entire day to build social media content was going to keep a student from scheduling with me, that's not going to work. If a student ended up saying, you know, in well enough time in advance that, oh, the only day I can make it work is, you know, this time from 12 to 1 because I work full time and then I have the kids' soccer practice or whatever, right? Then I'm going to make that time work. I can stand to eat at 12:30 instead of 12 for my lunch, or I can stand to carve out a half an hour of my social media time. But like you said, it's a lot of time. When I think of social media, I did in January, I just wanted a concept of how much time in the month I was dumping into social media, whether it was structuring the next month's content, creating images in Canva for every single on the road, or what's happening this week, or, you know, picking the perfect GIF to go with my statement, that is going to be widely relatable to all of the generations we serve, and still relevant to pop culture.
The fine line for sure.
Right, it is.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Right. At this point, everyone knows about Pokemon, so okay, great. Terrible. That's the one I was working on today. Anyway, I mapped it out in my handy dandy Excel sheet, what I did, how long it took, and then at the end of the month, I totaled it up. About 13 hours of that month was exclusively social media.
Yeah.
That didn't include every single repost of a story,
Sure.
or retweet or anything like that. And so, you know, finding 13 hours in your month is a challenge. And if that means, you know, like I said, it's the student first piece. And then it's having that open line of communication with your supervisor or with the person that has asked you or tasked you with this, even if it was yourself because you had a great idea and now it's yours to run with. Being mindful and transparent with your capacity. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, we are humans at the end of the day, and generally speaking, any other human that we are working with in our teams is going to recognize that, right? If I need to, you know what, social media is just going to have to go up a week later than planned into the schedule builder, right? We use Sprout Social on our campus. So I generally get to schedule them a month in advance, which is great. But if it's going to wait a week. If I can't get to it the day of, I'll post day one content and build it later that day. Yeah. Kind of thing. And so that open line of communication and that transparency with your capacity is huge. Just being able to say, you know what, I can't do this right now. Sure. Or I'm glad I had that great idea. We're going to have to pilot that next semester. Depending on what the issue is and what the change you're looking to make is. But well, sure. That kind of you kind of answered my next question. So thanks but yeah, I mean, with your supervisor and such, I mean, I think that's always important to have. Obviously, people have good relationships, they might not, but, you know, having that open and honest flow of communication to say that I am at my max right now, and we might need to push this into another time. Because, I mean, we know transfer students are, I mean, I work in enrollment, you work in enrollment. So like we all know, like there's hot times of years and then there's times that aren't so hot. And those times generally, you know, those projects that maybe have been pushed off for a long time, now's the time. You don't have as many student communications to go through. So, you know, still keep up on that, but you might have a few hours that day to then work on something else. So exactly. I think that you touched on an interesting piece earlier. And maybe this will be my last major question, but you were talking obviously about your supervisor, and then you were also talking earlier about how your job, you know, your expectations and your ratings and such are all going to be based off of your primary job responsibilities, because especially when you apply for a job, 15% this, 10% this, blah, 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 1% duties is assigned, which that 1%, like, come on. Really, we know that your first day, maybe, but then once you get you know, well into it, I mean, you're talking about, you know, 13 hours a month. You might think like, well, 160 work hours, not crazy, but then when you think about it in percentages, it's well over 1% for sure. So how do you seek feedback on performance? Motorcycle outside, sorry. How do you seek feedbacks on performance when completing these duties that are outside of those normal rating metrics? Good question. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just run with it because I'm being trusted to run with it, right? You know, if something comes up where it's like, well, why didn't we post about this? Or, you know, the president liked and retweeted your thing. Congratulations. All of that good stuff. Sure, that's great. I am a big fan of a kudos folder in my Outlook and documenting all the things. I am someone who my other duties is assigned, whether it's serving on a committee, whether it is, a search committee or a campus-wide committee that is normally outside of my sort of scope of work, right? It's not right path specific, but it's a transfer specific thing, and we need a transfer voice, those kinds of things. Every single bit of those go in some way, shape, or form on my CV. I have an institutional service section. And so whether it's that I'm being provided feedback or recognized for it from my direct supervisor at the institution, maybe that is, maybe that isn't the case. It is currently in this role. Hasn't always been. It will be recognized somewhere, right? It is documented somewhere that, I served on 6 search committees during, the first 6 months of 2020 and whatnot. You're right that open line communications is the big piece. If it is something that isn't sort of in my wheelhouse, right? It's something I've been tasked with that isn't my default. So with social media, I say in every interview I've ever had, I think that creativity is not my strong point. It is not my default. It is not my easiest thing to do. It takes me time to figure out if something aesthetically looks good or is catchy, which is why I was joking so much about the GIFs and picking the right one. That kind of stuff stresses me out a little bit. And so it's getting that feedback from people who have those strengths, right? And so it's coming up with, here's the 5 images that are sort of baseline of what I plan to use. Are we good to roll with these? How do we feel about them? Whether it's from, our marketing communications person in the undergrad admissions side of things, or, recognizing other people's strengths and sort of using those to my advantage. Is one way that I garner feedback as well. I don't know all the things, regardless of whether I think I do sometimes or not. I don't know all the things. And so being able to sort of have that humility and ask, is this what you were looking for? Right? Is this the type of thing you were thinking about? And if not, what tips do you have? Which way do you want to redirect it? Because this is all the juice I have in this creative zone, right? Redirect me if this is not how you sort of see fit, but not being so far in, right? Not having built in social media, for example, having built a month's worth of content and then having the person look at a few items and then say, oh, this is all terrible, right? Those colors don't go at all together, or this font is too small, or whatever. So getting early feedback is huge, but then I am a fan of being trusted to run with things. So, yeah.
Well, that trust is important. I am also not very creative, so I totally get it. Aside from meme making, which I feel like is the only art form that I truly possess. My wife has all of the artistic genes. I got none of them. Nope. But
let me review some writing for you, right? Let me tear apart your resume and cover letter. No problem. But
I'll do it. Yeah, for sure. That's a great point, though, that you brought up earlier. Like, if you're doing something great and maybe you're not being, as recognized as you would like to be in that, you're right. Put it on that resume. You present at a presentation and you only had a couple people show up. That might not feel great in the moment, but put it on your resume. You're going to be recognized. You did it. No one knows that only 2 people were there. So, you did well and you did that. So,
or, if no one showed up, take a picture of the room and you in front of your slide and post it on your not your institutional social media. But your personal, to say, it's important that I showed up, because even if it is not as well received as you may want it to be, and there are some adjustments that you need to make based on that feedback and whatnot, it's important to recognize that you are showing up in those spaces that aren't a part of your job. That really are, you're showing up voluntold into some of those positions. Yeah.
That's a great anecdote to wrap up on, unless you have anything else that you would like to add for the good of the order.
Oh, not that I can think of. I mean, really, it's about, like, we've sort of brought it home already, right? About the communication, about the knowing your own capacity, not saying yes just because you like to say yes to people. knowing your own capacity and whether you're going to be able to do it to the level that you want to be able to. A lot of us have high standards for ourselves and our work. And so if it is something that you know that your capacity, you know, you're at 99% already, and this is going to take 20%. Knowing that that's not the time for you, if you have that option. If it's something you're voluntold to do, then being transparent with the person asking of a timeline and what might give as a result.
Sure. That's great. You're so smart. Well,
stop.
Well, thank you so much for this today. I really enjoyed this conversation and piecing together, you know, parts of these things and it's just great hearing from people all around. So I do want to just publicly say thank you, Rachel, for doing this. Good luck in your new position. I'm happy for you. Good. You know, that's great being recognized for that too. On the OTC side of things, we should have some more, you know, the conference has been announced. Registration is important. The early bird registration is a little cheaper than the late registration. So early bird is going to be open for just under a month longer. So please register. It'll be a great conference. Our next PODTC episode is going to be about the conference and getting ready for the conference. So we're excited about that. But that's it for today. So thanks everyone for listening in. We'll see you soon.